Our job begins where most advisors stop. Saving money is great, but how do you spend it without risk in retirement? Welcome to Every Day is Saturday with Brad Gotto and Matt Stahl, partners and private wealth managers at Fiat Wealth Management. In this podcast, we aim to broaden your knowledge about the financial world we live in today and make the boring and complex financial decisions fun, informative, and educational. Join us on this journey where Brad and Matt will explore different strategies on how to spend your money without guilt and have peace of mind knowing you are spending it the optimal way in retirement.
All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Every Day is Saturday. I'm Brad Gotto, and unfortunately, my business partner, Matt Stahl, who normally is the one that does the introduction to these podcasts, he's not here today. He's on the mountains of all places, doing a little skiing with his family, and we're happy that he's able to do that. The good news is I'm not by myself. Why would you want to do a podcast by yourself? That's really boring. I brought Juan in. Juan, how are you, man?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me back. I feel like it was just a few weeks ago. It was actually a couple months now.
And if you don't know who Juan is, it means you haven't listened to every episode of our podcast. I believe it was episode 19 that got released, was the intro to all things Juan Toran. But for the listeners, Juan, if they didn't get a chance to listen to episode 19, remind them how you belong to the Fiat family.
So I'm one of the advisors here, a private wealth manager. I've been here since late 2020. And prior to that, I was a cop. I was a financial crimes investigator.
Not that it's a circuitous route into the financial advisory space or anything. And there's actually a lot more interesting facts about Juan if you want to go back and learn a little bit more about him. Again, episode 19, not that I'm trying to plug that again and again and again. But Juan, you didn't show up all by yourself. You actually brought a friend with you as well. So if you're watching us on video, you've already noticed we've got a third person here that we have yet to introduce. So Juan, who did you bring with you today?
Today, I brought Special Agent Rob Wilkinson. So Rob Wilkinson is a 17-year veteran of law enforcement. When I was
by the way.
When I was a patrol officer working with who then became my boss, but the financial crime investigator at the time when I was on patrol saw that I took a keen interest on financial crimes and let me come along on a few search warrants and help me out. Kind of, this is how you want to handle this type of case. Sure. This is how you want to handle that type of case. And I kept seeing this name pop up in all of her reports. It was Rob Wilkinson. She continuously worked cases with this guy, Rob Wilkinson. And I always wondered who Rob Wilkinson was. Well, sure enough, fast forward a few years, it's my time to interview for the position. So fast forward a few years when I'm interviewing for the now vacant position as financial crimes detective for the agency that I was with, that happens to be a part of the Minnesota Financial Crimes Task Force. And I walk into the room and sure enough, there he is, Rob Wilkinson, the one and only. I've read his name so many times, but I've never met him in person. And it was great. I got the job and we got to work several cases together and it was a lot of fun.
And, and Juan got the job solely based on merit. Those who have listened to the previous episode 19 know that he is perhaps the most interesting man in the world. I didn't know that at the time. It wasn't until after I got to know Juan a little better that, wow, it's really cool to do it.
Well, Rob, thanks for being here.
Thanks for
first and foremost. And I want you to tell the listeners a lot more about yourself, but let me just give them a little bit of understanding of why in the world that you're here. Juan, what are we talking about today?
We're talking about financial crimes. We're talking about fraud. We're talking about protecting yourself.
Yeah. Being in, this space of wealth management and kind of being acting CFOs for the families that we work with. Part of what we do, obviously, is to try to put together a financial plan that to help our clients. We always talk about this in the office. Our specialty is teaching our clients how to spend their money, right? Part of that is protection through kind of standard ways that you and I would think about, like insurances, right? How do if I want to protect my home, I have to have a homeowner's insurance. If I want to protect my income, I need to have some sort of guaranteed income. If I want to protect my life, I have to have life insurance. But then there's a little bit more obscure level of protection of like, okay, we live in 2022. It's the age of the internet. Everything is done online. I mean, we put our financial information everywhere. And I know in the back of all of our minds, I would hope we're all probably like, gosh, I wonder if what I'm doing is actually secure. I've probably put my social security number in on God knows how many websites, over the last handful of years, and credit card information, all that kind of stuff. And we've all heard about things like identity theft and fraud online and things like that. And so what we wanted to talk about today was some tips and tricks, things to be aware of. So like some knowledge, like what type of crimes are actually happening, and then how to try to avoid them and protect yourself as you move about in kind of this age of 2022 where most things are happening kind of at the speed of light. So how do we keep up with this and make sure that we're staying in front of the people that are trying to come after us? So why would we talk about that when we have specialists that do this every single day? So Rob, that's what you joined us here for today, was to share your expertise. But before you do that, give us a couple fun facts about Rob. Let's start with your family.
I have a wife, 3 children. We got quite the menagerie. I've got a dog, Luna. We've got the guinea pig, Sprinkles. My middle one has a number of guppies, and we've got 10 backyard chickens.
Oh, wow.
And because I have more than what my municipality allows, I'm not going to tell you where I live.
Oh, okay.
But, yeah.
Okay.
So, and if
cop breaking the law. Okay. Got it. Probably sped on the way here too, didn't you?
No, absolutely not. So we've got menagerie at home. One other thing that Juan and I have bonded over is Jeeps. Juan's got a fancy, like a Rubicon.
Yes.
Right. I have a 1977 DJ5. You've heard of CJ, a civilian Jeep. DJ is dispatcher Jeep. And that would be a mail Jeep, the old hardtop sliding door, right-hand drive mail Jeep. And one of these days, I'm actually going to work on that.
Mail as in the mail delivered to your house, not MALE.
Correct.
Like MAIO.
No, it's a gender neutral Jeep.
That's awesome. So of all the animals you have, I'm most curious how in the world you end up with a guinea pig. Sprinkles, nonetheless.
My wife thought it was a good idea. Okay. Or rather, my then 3-year-old thought it was a great idea. She's less enamored of the guinea. So if anybody listening would like a guinea pig, let me know. We can arrange that. But yeah, my daughter wanted a guinea pig. And
so how old are your kids now, Rob?
They are 12, 9, and 6.
12, 9, and 6. Awesome. So give us a little bit of background about what you do. What's your day-to-day?
So I work at the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, the BCA. That's the statewide investigative body. We don't like to compare ourselves to the FBI, but it's a good concept, right? Okay. So whether I can be working a financial exploitation all the way up in Ely down to an identity theft ring down in Faribault County. So that's, the north from all the way to Canada down to Iowa, out west to Marshall, Lyon County to the South Dakota border. So we're doing all sorts of crime throughout the state. So I do financial crimes, obviously. That's why I'm here. Yep. The BCA also investigates homicides, human trafficking, narcotics, cyber crimes, whatever needs to be investigated. Sure. We're deploying across the state, and we have got field offices. Different communities.
So at the BCA, you're a specialist in the financial crimes area. Obviously, you just mentioned that the BCA does all these other aspects as well. Does every one of those aspects have like a specialist in that field?
Yeah, and we'll have more or less. We have a single, I think right now, just one cyber agent, but we've got, you said, homicide agents and narcotics agents throughout the whole state.
Gotcha. So, and how many years have you been in the financial crimes?
I've been in financial crimes for about 10 years now. Okay. I've been at the BCA for coming up on 5. Prior to that, I was at the Ramsey County Sheriff's Office. I spent not quite 13 years there. Nearly 10 years ago, I was assigned full-time to the Minnesota Financial Crimes Task Force. Sure. Ended up making a transition from Ramsey County to the state during that time, but basically picked up my case files, moved across town, got a different badge, and picked up where I left off.
Yeah. I think the listeners would probably agree with me, at least some of the thoughts that I'm having in my head is you must have some really interesting stories. Obviously, probably not super positive stories of financial crimes. But when we're going to get into some of that today, we're going to start by talking about identity theft, which is kind of, these are people that typically you'll never meet, you'll never see their face, you'll never, interact with them personally. We're going to talk a little bit about like scams that can happen. And then we're going to talk a little bit how to protect yourself. And so we're going to end by talking a little bit more personally about people you probably do know and kind of how to protect yourself on a more personal level. But with that said, before I get into any of that, just give me one real quick story. What sticks out to you? What's one thing, like, what do you know now that you didn't know then, like through an experience that you had that kind of changed a paradigm for you?
Well,
I realize I'm putting you on the spot.
I don't know if it's the story you want to hear, but it's the story I'm going to tell. The rise of prepaid debit cards. And that's, kind of joke that 100% of crime involves some sort of prepaid debit card. And because it's very easy to quickly convert stolen funds into some quasi cash instrument that is, you can still trace it. It's laundered. It's effectively laundered, right? The origin's not known. You can very quickly monetize your ill-gotten gains in a way that you probably couldn't, I would say 10 years ago, but 10 years ago is when I started doing this, of course.
Yeah.
So that's when I had the aha moment. Once I realized, money has to be exchanged for goods or services or cash. And knowing that if somebody's funds are stolen, it's got to come out, it goes into, I'm going to just call it the system, right? The crime system, the ecosystem. It's got to come out the other end somewhere in the form of cash, goods, or services. And so my big paradigm shifter was, in fact, that, following just one more step, peeling back one more layer of the onion. And Juan's sat through a couple classes I've taught. And I think that's one of the themes that comes up is just peeling back one more, and seeing where it goes.
Yeah.
And obviously in 2022, the number of vectors or the ways your money can move around in that ecosystem grown exponentially.
Yeah.
So, but I think, I once upon a time, way back when, I was a water patrol guy. I drove a boat around, and I finally realized this is for the birds, right? We're working in the hot sun on the weekend when I could be the guy drinking a beer in his pontoon, right?
Yeah.
And so then I fell into doing financial crimes, but I think it was that peeling back one more layer was what got me to at least the position I have now.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I think over the last 4 years, the average American has become fairly savvy on money laundering, thanks to the show Ozark.
There's a lot of.
I'm currently in season 4 right now, episode 5. So it's the only thing I actually know about money laundering. That's what I've learned through Ozark.
The amount of good illustrations on streaming services of money laundering, the amount of money laundering on TV, on good TV in the last several years is phenomenal.
Yeah. Well, interesting. So we're going to start with identity theft, right? And actually, the reason that this first conversation, I don't know if you remember this one, came up was because shortly after you started here, I had a piece of mail come into Fiat.
Yes.
That my identity had been messed with. Yeah. And it was a piece of paperwork I would have just thrown away. I didn't think anything of it. And all the bells and whistles in Juan's head kind of went off. He's like, oh my gosh, you need to do this and this and this. And I was like, what? Excuse me? And so that kind of put us down this path of wanting to eventually have education around this idea of what to do if your identity theft is stolen. So let's just start with the very basics. What is identity theft? And I know you've got past experience. I'll throw the question out to either one of you. You guys feel free to.
I think a lot of the fun identity theft cases usually start with a car was stopped for XYZ motive, and then patrol ended up finding a bunch of stolen mail. Would you agree?
Yeah. Minnesota statute, the technical term of your identity is any unique identifier that can be used with your name or alone to identify you.
Okay.
So that's not just things like we all think social security number.
Yep.
Your bank account number is your identity. Your credit card number is your identity. Your driver's license number, your passport number, and so on and so forth. And obviously, that's a very small piece of information, right? Either stored electronically or written down on a piece of paper. And just one of those numbers can be incredibly useful to somebody who wants to do bad things with it. So, we talk about, I mentioned the mail Jeep, and it's, early February, we're moving into tax season. I think it's a good segue. Case I investigated in northern Ramsey County, Mounds View, Shoreview area, there were, several reports on nearly a daily basis, people finding a garbage bag full of mail in the ditch and turning it into the police. And one separately, I get a report from a woman who says, I filed my taxes, but I haven't gotten my packet of information back from my tax preparer. Well, she lived right in this corridor where all these thefts are occurring.
Sure.
And ultimately I got a hold of, she had store charge cards open in her account. So a lot of your things like Kohl's or where you're going to have a private label store charge card, you can't use it at just any general merchant.
Yep.
Had several of those accounts opened. And we were able to identify the IP address, the Internet Protocol address. That's the unique identifier of a device accessing the internet.
Kind of the DNA of a computer.
Yeah.
Yep.
comes back to an address in Mounds View. And all these store cards, there's only like 3 players in that space, and so it was Synchrony, then at the time was GE Capital, Citi. And I said, went to investigators there. I said, can you give me any fraudulent or declined applications or any application that came from that same IP address? They said, yep. And here's 50 of them. And it's all from
50
people,
from the same computer.
Same computer. And it's all people that lived in that same Northern Shoreview, Blaine, Mounds View area. And, the report was there was an Audi with a really loud muffler was tied to this. And it was somebody, we had separately identified somebody as a suspect. Well, he's been convicted. It says, Sean Wessling. Sean Wessling had an Audi that had a really bad muffler. And we ultimately stacked probably 60 victims. All people were getting checks stolen from the mail, their tax documents sent through the mail, credit card statements, or if they filled out the subscription form for a magazine, all that taken from the mail. So the first tip is, do you know what, and I know Juan knows the answer. Do you know what the little red flag on your mailbox means?
It means that I'm sending something out.
It means there's something in there that just to seal. They call that red flagging. So the crooks call that red flag.
They literally put the red flag on the mailbox. Like, here you go.
Oh yeah.
You take it.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Say, hey, that is a good one to go and steal stuff out. Right. So first tip, don't put anything in the mailbox that you don't want to get stolen. Okay. So if you're mailing a greeting card to your grandmother, there's no money inside, put the red flag. Probably not a big deal. If you're mailing a check,
your grandmother will never get that greeting card.
That is also true. And that's a good reminder. Have you called your grandmother lately?
Unfortunately, she's no longer with us.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry about that.
My wife just recently sent her grandmother a greeting card, and she did get it and complained because she looked at the back of it. It was made in China.
Oh, no.
94 years old. That was her concern. Anyway, go ahead.
Anyway, so, but if you do insist that you have to put something in the mailbox, stand that mail piece up on its side, like a book on a bookshelf.
Yep.
And that will tell the mail carrier that that's something you want to send out. If you just lay it in there, it's going to sit there forever because the mail carrier will assume that it was delivered to you. But stand it up on its side. Don't put your flag up. Better yet, hand stuff directly to a mail carrier.
Sure.
Or put it in a blue box at a post office.
Yeah.
Fun fact though, if you can see mail piled up inside of the blue box, assume the crooks can too. So don't put your mail in there. Get up and walk inside. If your workplace has, the carrier come and pick it up, put it in your outgoing mail that way. But all it takes is that name and social security number. Obviously you're not putting your social security number on your regular correspondence or stuff for your magazine subscription. But
that was going to be my question is what is it that they can take from you that they can do harm with? Is it just the social security number or is there other things that we need to be protecting?
Your social security number and your account number is the one you need to protect, but realize in 2022, all this information is out there readily available. There's plenty of commercial data brokers that you can pay a low cost, or if you Google, you Google Rob Wilkinson or Juan Toran, you're probably going to be able to figure out some personal data about us. I mean, it's just out there. And with the number of data breaches, I don't know what you experienced, but if anybody in your family worked for the federal government in the recent past or applied for a job there was Office of Personnel Management data breach and millions of people's personal data points were exposed. So it's almost not a question of if, but when.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, you can take a lot of steps to mitigate that by protecting that social security number, your driver's license number. And remember, the crooks that are stealing that, they probably stole someone else's money too. So it wasn't like they had to pay for the subscription to some of these websites to fill in the blanks like your mother's maiden name. Have you used that, as your security question and password, right? So another tip is just make it some complete non sequitur. What's your mother's maiden name? Meatloaf. God rest his soul.
So if it's a matter of if, not when, and the assumption, if you live by that assumption, what should you, are there services out there that in the event your identity is stolen that can help you, or basically kind of insurance so that if this does happen, it doesn't ruin your life kind of thing? Like, what can we be doing?
Well, there's any number of commercial available services, and I don't get money from any of them, and I don't endorse any particular one, but the people listening have gotten this far, right? So they're taking some active interest in themselves. And this being 2022, everybody's got a smartphone. I would encourage everybody, you're diligently monitoring your bank accounts. So if you've got your online bank accounts, when, hey, what's this charge? And you can sign up for, depending on your bank, if you're getting notifications, that a charge posted. Yeah. And I regularly call my wife and say, hey, did you go and shop at blah, blah, blah? Because hey, we got the money, no problem. Enjoy yourself. I just want to make sure you weren't, somebody didn't rob it, or didn't steal from us. And same thing, your bank will probably give you the opportunity to not necessarily free credit scores, but free credit reports, and it's a good idea to keep a regular eye on that. You can go to www.annualcreditreport.com. That's operated. I don't know who operates it, but it's free. Yeah. And you can get one copy of each of the three major bureaus once a year. So you can spread that out and get TransUnion one third of the year and so on. But as I tell the biggest people, even if you've been the victim of identity theft, the main thing to do is diligently monitor your online accounts and monitor your credit scores. Those are going to be the biggest things that happen. And, you mentioned Juan, you showed Juan that letter, and there's this litany of these are XYZ bad things that can happen, down to a warrant being issued for your arrest by somebody who's posing as you, right? And one thing that's important to know is that criminals tend to have a very specific MO. They've got one shtick. And so as we've come out of the pandemic, the amount, there's a lot of money thrown at folks who are unemployed. And that's obviously ripe for abuse. The easier you make it, right? And so there are all kinds of folks, my coworkers, and I'm sure Juan can think of people you worked with that get a letter saying your unemployment claim has been denied. And I can tell you, high-ranking elected officials in the state of Minnesota got those letters, right? And it's important to know that the person that applied for unemployment in your name, they just happen to have your name and social, right? And they went on to the next person if that did or didn't work. And so they're not also, besides, well, I didn't get unemployment, but why don't I try and open a credit card in their name? Why don't I get a fake ID with their picture? Sure. So there's this whole litany of things that could happen, but the silver lining, I guess I won't say the good news, but the silver lining is probably the thing about is probably most of the time the worst that's going to happen. And I often refer people to www.idtheft.gov. idtheft.gov has got a great kind of roadmap to work through figuring that out. And depending on the circumstances, there may be other steps that you want to take. If if I'm helping my grandmother navigate identity theft, the odds that somebody is going to pose as her and then commit a crime and get a warrant for their arrest, and now my grandma's got a warrant for her arrest, is pretty low, right? But that may happen to a different segment in that. But pay attention to what's going on with your finances, on the daily, the near term, like your deposit accounts, and the longer term, your credit accounts, and then know that of all the bad things that could happen, the number of bad things that will happen is probably fairly low. Sure.
But so last question on this, and then we got to get the scams part of this, but like passwords, we you get notifications all the time, like, hey, this password's been in a data leak. You might want to change it, things like that. You can change passwords, and then you've basically kind of solved that problem. You can't change your social security number.
Correct.
Right. And so the odds are in favor that all of us just at this table have somebody else other than us knows our social security number that we probably don't want them to know. So how do you, or can you do anything to basically, other than just monitoring accounts and hope that they don't cause damage, do anything just to protect that number?
I mean, right now it's tax season. So people are receiving W-2s, 1099s, all these tax documents from banks, from employers, from investment accounts, et cetera. Just be diligent. If there's ever a time to get your mail as soon as the carrier drops it off, if possible, now's that time. Because just like that it's tax season, the crooks also know that it's tax season, and that information is out there. It's going out there. Anything else to add?
Yeah, you can't get a new social security number if it's compromised, but you can be diligent. And, we all drive cars every day, and that's fundamentally a dangerous activity, but we, for the most part, obey the speed limits, and for the most part, wear safety belts. So there's things you can do to mitigate the risk you're taking.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key takeaway, is that if you're paying attention to what's going on, you can't prevent everything from happening.
Yeah.
But you can mitigate the damage or stop the damage in a hurry.
Yeah. For somebody like me that doesn't get my mail every day, if I'm just being honest, I'm also not going to say where I live, because if we have crooks listening to this podcast, I'm just giving away the fact that I'm the prime suspect, or not suspect. I'm the prime victim. Yeah. But also the idea or concept of me having to watch my accounts all the time just seems a little daunting to me. And so what I've done is I've set up automated alerts. You made the point of every time my credit card gets swiped, I get a notification on my phone. So when I'm at a restaurant, I hand them my credit card to go, and then they leave with my credit card to go pay the bill. Before they even come back, I've got a notification on my phone that the $47.37 for my Applebee's meal it was just charged, right? Or certain transactions that you can set up to flag at your bank or whatever it may be. And so there are ways to have your financial institutions that you do business with basically be on the watch for you.
Absolutely.
Correct. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about kind of this whole idea of scams, because these have been around for a long time. Identity theft is one thing, right? People taking information out of your mailbox and using your social security number. But then there's also people trying to convince you to give them your money. They're not just going to try to take it from you blindly without you even knowing. They're going to try to convince you to give it to them. So tell us, kind of give us the context of what we mean by kind of these financial scams.
These are going to be any of the things, we all get emails. Congratulations. We did a diligent search, and turns out you're the last heir to the royal family. And there's $1 million, and in strictest confidence, I want to cut you in, and all we got to do is pay $10,000 up front to release the funds or something like that.
And we all laugh about that now because that's been around for a long time. And now 15, 20 years after the fact, that seems completely ridiculous, but people fell for it. But today they're a lot more believable. I feel like some of the things that you get in the mail, it seems like, oh, that could be legit. You have to really kind of pause and think about it but it's believable. Like the prince in Africa, that's out there. But give another example of something that probably sounds a little bit more believable.
Well, and that's the thing, is the psychology of this. And I'm not a psychologist, right? I don't have a psychology degree, but
it's a good thing you said that. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to air this podcast.
There's the romantic scams.
Well, it's all this. We want to believe the best.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's human nature. And so, so back when I was a patrol deputy for Ramsey County, I go to this apartment complex, and there's this, I hate to say it, but kind of the sad sack guy living in the basement apartment.
Yeah.
And he says, "Hey, I got this call from this guy, and he says he's with the Arizona Highway Patrol. And this girl that was my girlfriend who's coming to visit me from Ohio got in an accident. And because she was coming to visit me, I'm on the hook, and I have to pay the fine or something, or I'm going to be in trouble, or she's going to be in trouble." And he goes, "But, Arizona's not on the way to Minnesota from Ohio." He goes, so I think it's a scam. I'm like, "Yeah, it's a scam." And he's like, "Boy, she's going to really laugh at this when she gets here." I'm like, "When who gets here?"
Oh,
"Well, my girlfriend." I'm like, "No, that's the scammer," right? So we have, these almost blend together, these cases where somebody has been talking to somebody online, and now they're in love with their fiance whom they've never met, or at best they had some choppy Skype conversation for a few minutes and then it mysteriously cut out, and their lover is in Kenya, and he's got an oil rig that's in hock to the Spanish government, and as soon as he pays them off, then he can take his millions back and they can live happily ever after. And again, at some point somebody suspends disbelief and thinks this sounds like a good idea, and then there's maybe it's kind of a sunk cost fallacy that I can in a certain way relate to this. I mean, you think about times where you've been on surveillance where you think, okay, they haven't shown up. We haven't seen anything. Let's give it 5 more minutes.
Yeah.
5 more minutes, 10 more minutes. Right. And you sit there and you just wait a little bit more. And then these people who have sent some money think, well, and then they get a message saying, well, all you have to do is send us this much more. And then you get all of it.
Yeah.
And so it ends up being good money after bad. And so, think critically about, is this too good to be true?
Mm-hmm.
If it's too good to be true, it probably is. And like you said, this is the authenticity that can be achieved now compared to several years ago is amazing. And you've heard of the grandkid in trouble scam.
Yeah.
Right. So your scammer calls you up and grandpa, who's this? It's your favorite grandson, Wayne. Yeah. Wayne,
Yeah.
And so then,
there just I can't remember if it was local or national, but a grandmother that this happened to, and she called him out. It was like $8,000, and she convinced them to come to her house to get the money to get her grandson out of jail, and then immediately called the police. And did you guys see this?
No,
I can't remember if this was here in Minnesota or if it was a national story, but she totally set the guys. Like, she realized, luckily, she caught on to it. This guy's trying to scam me, but she had worked as a dispatcher for a long time, right? So she had a connection to law enforcement. So her bells and whistles went off, and this guy shows up at the house, of course, to collect $8,000. The cops jump out, tackle him. And
that's kind of part of it's easier nowadays that, used to be, you would have to go and send a wire to somebody. Send me a Western Union to, Bisbee, Arizona. and now with various apps or computer trickery, for lack of a better term, they can figure out, okay, they go to a neighborhood and from their car place the call and say, okay, my associate, Mr. Smith's going to come and pick up that money in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And they're showing up at the doorstep versus back when they had to go. And so that makes it a lot easier. And then they just take that money down to, I'm going to use the term generically, a money service business. But any of these big box stores that has like a financial center in it, and then they can do a person-to-person transfer to someone else, and that money's gone out the door.
Yeah.
You're not getting it back.
Another one that I had a few cases that started like this. And I don't know how prevalent they are nowadays. Maybe you can speak to this, but I don't know about you, Brad, but let's see, I got rid of a couch a few months ago.
Yep.
I sold it on Facebook Marketplace, but you can sell it on Craigslist. There's a bunch of different apps that you can sell things on. And I had several cases where people were selling something online and a buyer reached out and said, hey, I'm interested in buying that. I'm going to mail you a check.
Yeah.
So then they mail a check, and let's say they're selling a couch for $100 and they receive a check for $1,000 with instructions that say, hey, I'm trying to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. You take your $100 plus an extra 100, deposit that into your account, but then could you please use one of these money services businesses to wire it to this account in, you name it, different country, South America, Africa, because I'm trying to get money to my family or to my business associates, whatever that is. So then the victim in this case would, if they would follow the instructions, would do that, but then they'd be held liable because that check was not a good check. Does that still happen?
Oh, absolutely. And
so they convince you that they're basically paying you. Here's for your product plus some extra money. Help me out. By the time the check bounces, you've already wired
exactly
$1,000 to wherever it goes, and the money's gone.
So you're out that money.
And oftentimes it can be a counterfeit check drawn from a legitimate commercial business. So the check doesn't bounce. I mean, it's paid, but then somebody, the controller or whoever at this company says, well, wait a minute, why do we pay Juan Toran $2,000? And then they dispute it with the bank and it gets reversed. In the meantime, Juan got some good money out of that and sent it on to the scammer.
Yeah.
In 1986, Michael J. Fox made his first million in like Teen Wolf, and he bought a Nissan 300ZX T-tops.
Is this a true story that we're going into?
This is a true story because I later bought the same model car.
Okay.
Right? When I was younger and poorer, right? And then I went to sell that in a car soup at the time, and I get somebody email, I want to buy your car. In fact, I'm going to pay you whatever it's going to cost to import it to Toronto, Canada. And I'm going to give you a little extra for your trouble. And I thought, this sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
Right? And fortunately, I had the presence of mind. I'd tell my dad, like, hey, I sold my car and I'm going to blah, blah, blah. He's like, that's a scam. I sold, that was 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, so it's still going on. And, I had worked on a case in central Minnesota where a young man who he was starting out as a personal trainer, and he put ads online, personal training services.
Mm-hmm.
And he gets a text from somebody who says, I'm hiring you sight unseen to provide personal training services for my 3 children while I'm in the hospital. I'm in the hospital for a procedure to my mouth and throat, so I cannot talk to you. I can only communicate via text. To kill 2 birds with 1 stone, I'm going to send you the cost of 4 personal training lessons and the cost for the driver to come pick the kids up. Pay the driver directly and send it on to, whoever in Mankato, Minnesota. Well, that guy in Mankato is also an unwitting participant in this, who's getting money for probably not a good reason he can articulate.
Yeah.
Right. But then he's supposed to take that money and then send it off to your scammer who hired the personal trainer in the first place. And so, kind of to Juan's point, there's any number of variations of this with little changes, but all fundamentally is you get somebody sends you good money that's stolen. You take that out and send it off to them. Now you're on the hook and they're laughing all the way to the bank.
So Rob, got to end this part of, this whole scam conversation with something positive. What in the world what do we do? Because especially like when I think about, the people that we work with here at Fiat and maybe the people listening to the podcast, our average client is probably over the age of 55 would be my guess. Elderly people, I wouldn't say at 55 you're elderly, but they tend to be gone after more when it comes to this type of scam. At least that's what I've heard. Is that true in your experience?
That's typically true.
And so what do we do to give us a couple practical tips to protect ourselves against these types of scams? Because they're not going anywhere, right?
Stop and ask yourself, does this make sense? Does this thing that I'm doing make sense? If Juan wanted to run afoul of the SEC, he could ask clients, hey, I've got this like private off-label thing. Write a check directly to me and I'll deposit that. And I can promise you returns of like 27%, right? All claims and certain, whatever your licenses you have, you can't make any of those, right?
Correct. Correct. Yes.
Correct. Good answer.
His name is not Juan Bernie Toran.
So the first thing is, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. Think a thing, ask yourself, does this make sense? And go on to that diligence piece, because we have had situations where we've recovered those funds from people that, talking about a scam, a business email compromise, somebody wires money they think for their home closing. And at the last second, they get a mysterious email changing the wire instructions. And there's been situations where we've been able to recover those funds through legal process, but it has to happen within, about the first 24 to 72 hours. Yeah. So pay attention, to what you're doing. And as soon as you think something's wrong, then you need to notify the authorities.
So if you're getting these emails and somebody's trying to, whether it's selling something on Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist, and somebody's trying to pull, when that happens, you should notify the authorities of that.
Well, you don't have to notify the authorities just because the fact that you got an email. I mean, because if you go in your spam folder right now, you've got 30 that you got just today, right? But nobody to whom you legitimately owe money is ever going to email you or call you. They will send you a letter. Yeah. So responding to email requests for more money is nearly always a bad idea.
Okay. So that's one way to filter, right? If it's coming through email, it's probably not correct.
Correct.
Is there, if you were, whether it's an email or it's, this whole online, I'm selling something online and they're trying to push money around on you, is there questions that you would ask through the email or through, just to kind of for sure clarify in your mind, yes, for sure, this person's trying to take advantage of me? Anything you can think of?
If the email doesn't seem to, if the message doesn't seem, for lack of a better term, written by a non-native English speaker, that's probably something that bears further scrutiny.
Sure.
If somebody
it's not
wants
grammatically correct.
Right. If somebody wants to sort of consummate the transaction outside of the channel in question, that's something that you should look askance at. If
they're offering you more money than you're asking for.
If they're offering more money than you're asking for, that's what we investigators call a clue.
Fair enough. Well, so we start off, identity theft could be a face you've never seen, a scammer you could end up interacting with, but typically somebody you don't know. But then there are also financial crimes that happen right inside of your group of people, family members, people that you think that you love, that you trust. And so talk to me a little bit about your experience and what you've seen there.
Yeah. There's I'll broadly classify what I do into, you got your pure white collar stuff and you've got street crime, where that's what you're talking about earlier. People you don't know stealing from you.
Yeah.
And that's mostly bad luck. But then you have your white collar, somebody who's using some position of authority to relieve you of your money. And that could be you're part of a nonprofit, say your scout troop or your kid's sports club, and there's a treasurer who's helping themselves to the checkbook, or you have somebody who's acting in some sort of fiduciary capacity, a trustee. If you got, and we discussed, if you're listening to this podcast, you've probably already taken some steps to think about what you're doing with your wealth.
Yeah.
And part of that is some healthy skepticism.
Yep.
And that's not that you distrust, that's not automatic mistrust, but, the idea of operating on total trust is probably not a good one. And so, I can tell you a story of, there was an elderly couple who he was a World War II veteran, and through the GI Bill, he got an engineering degree and had some mechanical aptitude and ended up being some kind of troubleshooter for, I think, a dairy milk production firm. Okay. So he got flown all over the world to go and troubleshoot like these machines. And they had one child, and he made enough money that they could travel to Europe for 2 weeks every year, buy his wife furs, fairly well off. And they lived in Wright County, Minnesota. And as they got on in years and they're a little less mobile, they decided to move out of that home. And so they got a power of attorney drafted to facilitate the closing. So they didn't have to drive all the way from, I think they were in a nursing home or something at that point. So they didn't have to go all the way back to Buffalo to consummate this real estate transaction. And then along the line, daughter and son-in-law got the bright idea. They forged a power of attorney and then took that to the bank and relieved mom and dad of $106,000.
Whoa.
Yeah. Now, fortunately, mom and dad were paying attention. They're looking at the bank statement. And I would say that if I stole from you on day one of your accounting period and you're looking at your bank statement regularly, and that's 30 days later, that's probably not soon enough. That's why I talk about, be diligent in monitoring your accounts online. But they're being relatively diligent, and they see, hey, how come we're 106,000 light? So they go down to the bank. The bank
noticeable amount.
Yes. Yeah. I would say that noticeable to anybody. And so, well, your daughter and son-in-law came in, and here's the power of attorney. So we didn't do that. So they got the power of attorney revoked. They made a report with the sheriff's office, and I was able to go back. And again, it was one of those fairly quick operations, and seize those funds and get most of it back.
Real quick to interject, are you telling me, generally speaking, then, if it's 24 to 72 hours, regardless of how whether you were scammed or it was white collar kind of family power of attorney situation, that you got a much better chance of recovering? And if it's 30 days later, the odds are significantly less? Because I've heard you say it a couple of different times.
Yeah, one thing that if people who are good at impulse control and forethought and long-range planning don't tend to gravitate towards a life of crime. Sometimes they do, but not typically, right? So long way of saying that if Juan stole $50,000 today, Juan probably has something going on in his life. He is probably not taking $50,000 and parking it in a good investment vehicle.
Right.
He's probably gambling it or doing something else nefarious. Sure. And as soon as he spent the money, the person that he spent, or wherever he spent that money, is under no obligation to give it back to you.
Gotcha.
So as soon as the person who steals the money exchanges it for cash, goods, or services, or maybe not cash, but goods or services, now it's gone.
once it's 2 degrees separated from you, the odds of ever getting it back dwindle dramatically.
Yep.
Gotcha. And this one hits incredibly close to home, because when you work with families that, have an estate, right, and have investable assets and want to do what's right by their family, and know that they need to start trusting other people to help them make decisions in life, or trusting other people even after they pass away, that they're going to act in the best interest of what they wanted with their money. What's a kind of a good rule of thumb when you're kind of building plans like that to make sure that the person that you're trusting is going to actually carry out that fiduciary responsibility that you've given them?
That they have there's some mechanism to make them be accountable. So there has to be transparency,
Sure.
And you can figure out, however you figure that out, whether it's someone else is reviewing the bank statements, they're rendering a periodic accounting, but it can't be just sort of this, well, he's been my best friend since forever, therefore
Sure.
I trust him.
Yeah.
And this isn't to say that everybody in the world wants to steal from you, but you set yourself up for, you're going to be you will only be as successful as you've set yourself up to be. And so it's not that you don't trust somebody that's doing it. It's sound management principles.
Well, and at the end of the day, anybody we were willing to give executive powers of an estate or a fiduciary power to our estate, we would obviously trust, or we wouldn't be doing it in the first place. And so the benefit of the doubt for that person is probably really, really strong. And so this idea in our mind of they would ever go sideways on you or make a decision that's not in your best interest or your estate's best interest is hard to fathom, right? It's even hard to put into the ether to think that may happen. But the bottom line is it has happened, and it will continue to happen. One of the things that we've seen is the power of using a corporate trustee versus an individual, right? Don't give the powers, your estate powers to your best friend, give it to a bank, right? Where there's an entire team that is, an entity that's acting on your behalf rather than an individual person. Adds another layer of protection if you think that that's necessary for your family.
Yes. For a long time, we as society have been kind of conditioned that polite society doesn't talk about money, and we don't talk about money in our family. And I think if you're not willing to discuss it in a mature way and in a transparent, it doesn't mean you go and you're not bragging about how much money you have, but it's talk to your loved ones about, here's how much we have, here's the documentation, here's the assets, this is what I'd like to have happen, and we expect that there'll be an accounting, not because we don't trust the person we've named as trustee, but it's just sound management. And we worked hard to get this, accumulate this wealth. So why throw caution out the window now?
Yeah, absolutely. So for the listeners that have, there's been a lot of information, and this, I don't want anybody to walk away from this podcast scared, right? But sometimes the worst place to be in life is when you just don't know what you don't know. And so being aware that this stuff exists and that there's people out there every single day trying to get access to information and to take advantage of anybody that they can take advantage of is important to know, and some practical tips of how to protect yourself, which we've gotten here today. Do you have any additional resources that you can think of that are good for people, whether it's a website or a book or just anything like that, to continue to educate themselves or figure out other tips and tricks to kind of protect your identity or protect yourself from scammers, things like that?
Like I said, idtheft.gov is a great resource for preventing and responding to identity theft. Know what services your financial institution offers you, and take advantage of more services than simply your demand deposit accounts.
Yeah.
Have a healthy, mature conversation with your loved ones about wealth management or what you have and your wishes.
Yeah.
You want to figure these things out. If you want to figure out how to respond to a problem before it happens.
I think that's actually a really good point, and a great place to end too, is because you made the point of, finances are a very intimate part of our lives. It's not something we like to talk about, share with family members and loved ones and that kind of thing. And as you get older in life, and your tends to be that your finances become more significant and your estate grows over time, that bringing people in your life into the know so that they can help be your eyes and ears and spotters for any potential scam that's out there, identity theft. Because when you're out there on your own and you're the only one that knows anything about your money, you have nobody to help you, no teammates basically helping you figure out if something is a scam, if somebody's messing around with your identity. It's always better to have teammates, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So, with that said, Rob, it's been awesome. Juan, first of all, thanks for joining us today. And thanks for bringing Rob to us today. Thanks to the Bureau for lending us your time. It's been great because at the end of the day, just even doing what we do on our side of the financial world, even when I had my episode, if you want to call it that recently, I had no idea what to do. And this is just an area that I just feel like the average person is very undereducated. Right. And so I think this has been a very valuable time and experience. So again, Rob, thanks so much for joining us, taking time out of your day. Love to have you back at some point because at the end of the day, any new stuff pops up all the time. And so allowing our listeners to kind of stay on top of what's going on out there and how people are trying to take advantage of us. It's good to know. It's good to know. So on that note, to everybody that's out there listening, thanks so much for joining us on this episode of Every Day is Saturday. As always, we thank you for listening. If you haven't done so already, subscribe to the podcast. There's a link down below so you don't miss any of the future episodes. And if you want to, feel free to share the podcast with your friends and with your loved ones. Again, Rob, Juan, thanks for being here today. And everybody, we'll see you next Saturday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Every Day is Saturday. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Fiat Wealth Management or Foundation's investment advisors. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.
Investment advisory services offered through Foundations Investment Advisors, LLC, an SEC registered investment advisor.